What up, everyone? It's your favorite Brooklyn boy, Anthony Carano, coming to you live with Café Meets Coaches. This will be a podcast centered around physical education for the masses. We'll go over a range of different topics such as movement science, fitness planning, and how movement plays a role in the development of mind, body, and spirit. My goal is to bridge the gap between academia and practice, helping friends, colleagues, and future professionals with the motivation to move and the knowledge to do so efficiently. Like the title suggests, some of the episodes will be recorded in person at a cafe. They might be at a fitness center, they might be on Zoom. If it's in person, you might hear some background noise in the podcast. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, there we go. We are officially recording.
Got it.
So I have with me today Lee Taft. Before I run into any introductions or anything in that realm, I usually do an icebreaker question. So I have like a little deck here with, there's 3 questions on each card. So you get to pick which question you want to answer. So I just pulled one out. Let's see what we've got. It says here, what compliment have you received and never forgotten? Why do some people live alone today compared to in the past? And would you move to the other side of the world? So you get to pick one of the 3.
Those are good. Those are good. All right. You know what? I think I'll pick the last one. Actually, I like all of them, but I'll pick the last one because I traveled to South Korea 3 times and in Japan. I've been over there and I loved it. Loved it every time I was there. It's funny because I talk with my wife a lot about this, and I could move. I love America, absolutely, but I'm not the type that has to live in America. I could move and live in another country, and definitely halfway around the world would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a nice experience, right? Something different.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
give us all a little introduction about who you are, a little bit of your background in the specialty of speed and basketball.
Yeah, thanks. So started out like you, I was a phys ed teacher. I grew up I'm the youngest of 6, and then my dad was in education, physical education, coaching for 44 years. My brothers, who have been retired for many, many years now, were phys ed teachers and coaches, and so I went into that field. Started in the 80s, and I got out of it to go into strength. I did my master's, and my emphasis was sports science, but kind of emphasized strength and conditioning. And then I went back into teaching for a while. I became, phys ed. I worked all different levels, K through 12, middle school, everything. And during that time, I was coaching again, head football coach, head track coach, coached basketball, did strength and conditioning at a high school. And then, I opened up my facilities. I've had 5 different training academies, which we called speed academies. And, I was always intrigued. And the cool thing about it, Anthony, is it was, in my case, the way I felt personally, it was a better version of physical education because I taught in some schools and I loved the schools I were in, but I started to get so every day I went to school worrying about discipline problems rather than what am I going to teach today? I could picture in my head the 4 or 5 knucklehead kids that I knew were going to be a problem every day. And that's what my focus went to. So when I opened up my speed academies, I was training 60 kids a day, 0 problems. And if I did have a problem, I just gave their check back and said, thanks, but no thanks. And I never had an issue with them. So, but I got to really break down and teach physical education as it used to be back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And when the presidents really put a big push into it, that was what I really enjoyed. So yeah, now I'm actually coaching basketball at a local high school my son goes to, and I still train. And we actually I got back just about a half hour ago from a morning session, and we did some skill and got in the weight room, and yeah, it was great. It was a good day. So that's kind of what I've been doing.
I heard rumor has it you have some athletic abilities yourself. You still demo a lot of the things at your trainings and right?
I do. Yeah. It's funny is I always tell coaches who ask me about, they're like, Lee, how do you still move pretty well? I'm like, I never stopped. I've never stopped from the day I was an athlete in elementary school through high school, college, and coaching. And I do so many workshops and clinics. I'm always demonstrating. So this morning it was funny because I was showing a couple of kids defensively how to really get in and lock down and move laterally. And I'm 57 years old. I don't move like I used to, but I can still get in and demonstrate pretty good. So yeah.
That's awesome. By the way, I hope you appreciate my background. I like to have fun with them. That's the Space Jam there, basketball, speed training. I figured it kind of fits in well and in a fun way.
One of the quickest athletes right behind you.
Yeah, that's right. So speaking of quickness, when it comes to, speed training, there's some people that will listen to the podcast that'll have a good background and really know some of this stuff, and some really might not, like just the basics of what's the difference, or can we use the words speed training, change of direction, velocity training, accelerate? Can we use those words interchangeably? Are they different? What are the components that we want to think about when we're thinking about the strength and conditioning side of speed? What are those components we want to think about, and what are we trying to get after?
Yeah, great questions. So the first question is, if I'm speaking with another professional that dives deep into the world of movement training, which encompasses speed or maximal speed, acceleration, which is shorter duration, building up to max speed, or if we talk about change of direction training versus agility, we have to be specific. So let's say I had an athlete that moved to New York City and I wanted them to work with you. And I said to you, hey, Anthony, I want you to work. This athlete needs a lot of work on their agility recognition, their agility training. Well, agility has to do with reading the environment, making a quick decision, and then using whatever speed footwork is appropriate. So Bugs Bunny behind you there, a basketball player, there's times when if I'm watching you, if I'm guarding you in basketball and you make a really hard crossover and go, well, I have to be able to have the agility to read it, plan what I'm going to do, and then be able to make that action. As where if I said to you, hey, Anthony, I'm going to send you an athlete. I want you to do a 5-10-5 test with them twice a week. That's change of direction training because it's blocked training. You know exactly what you're doing. The athlete knows exactly what they're doing. They're going 5 yards, 5 yards, and 5 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. So that's change of direction training. A lot of people use those interchangeably. And if I'm speaking to a general physical education group of teachers or beginner coaches, you can use it generally. Because to them, if I say, hey, let's go do some agility training, to them, they're like, all right, let's go out there and move around and do some speed and quickness. That's what they get. But when you're talking with a professional who understands it and you need something specifically done, then you got to make sure, because if I'm using acceleration training, but my athlete needs actually max velocity training, okay, I just did a disservice to them. So yeah, the words do matter. And then you asked about like strength training. How important is strength training as it relates to these things? So, especially if we're going to talk about acceleration, my body is stopped. It's like inertia hasn't been acted upon yet, right? My inertia is still. So I haven't moved yet. So to get myself moving, whether I'm coming out of the blocks or I'm in a defensive stance and I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden I have to burst and go, that takes a level of strength to be able to move my body mass. So yeah, strength training is really important, but it also is really important for deceleration or change of direction, which would be like re-acceleration. I go and I touch this line, change direction, go back, that kind of stuff. I need a baseline of strength that allows me to be able to produce a force to slow down quickly and then to accelerate quickly. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's very, very important, not to mention from the health standpoint, keeps you healthy.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. That was well stated and well said. So when it comes to, so now we have all these different buckets here. So not really max velocity, but thinking more so change of direction
Yep.
and acceleration. When you're trying to get an athlete better in those realms, are you thinking strength training? Are you thinking, um, you know, uh, plyometric work? Are you, what's your focus with that athlete?
Yeah. So the three things that I always look at for any skill, any of the, especially the seven main movement patterns, which I could talk about later if you'd like, but
Yeah,
the
he's good.
mainly what we're trying to do is we're going to look, how is their biomechanics? Like, are they biomechanically efficient and effective?
Mm,
Number two, do they have the strength and or power to be able to execute that skill? And number three, do they have skill acquisition? Do they understand it? Like, can they actually perform the skill effectively? So I may watch you move. Let's say you're a seventh grader that came to me the first time doing change of direction training, and I watch you move, and I notice when you do a shuffle or a run to the line and you touch the line and you come back in the other direction, I notice you kind of get stuck. Like, you don't really get in and get out of the cut really quick. You get stuck there. In my head, immediately, I'm saying, okay, could be a strength issue, but because he's out of position, his technique isn't very good, which we could call biomechanics or technique.
mm.
I think I'm going to address that first. Let me clean your technique up. Now, if your technique is really good and you're still really sluggish, it looks like you're kind of stepping in sand and you're just not able to push up, then I'm probably going to say, okay, I think he's got a little bit of a lack of strength. Might need to get him a little bit stronger. It's going to take a little time, but we'll be able to make him efficient still. So that's kind of how I apply my strategies based on those three things. Biomechanics, is it just their arms and legs all over? You just don't know how to control their body. Number two, is there a strength issue or a power issue? Or elasticity? You mentioned plyometrics, that's a little bit more elastic. Or is it skill acquisition? They just don't know how to do the skill yet. I haven't given them a chance to learn the skill. So once I look at that, that helps me pinpoint, is it a strength issue or is it not?
And I noticed, that's all great stuff, by the way, but I noticed there's three main pieces of equipment that you use, or you mentioned in one of, I was looking through your website and on your Instagram, I forget which place I found, but the ladder, a 6-inch, no, was it a 6-inch box? And
Like about a 2 inch, two and a half
saying
inch
six
box.
too high or whatever it
Yeah.
was. I know that the height really matters because once you go too high, no
Yes.
good.
Yes.
And then the super band. So why those three pieces of equipment, and are you targeting change of direction with those pieces of equipment and acceleration?
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So let's go the bands first. We'll talk about the last thing you mentioned first. So when I
Yeah,
take a band, so actually here, let me show you.
sure.
I got a ton of them. So this is an example. Look at the size of this. This is a 110-inch looped band. So I use these. I got all different weights, all different sizes and strength. And actually, I had a new athlete last night, put him through an assessment, and to change how he understood force into the ground, like we were doing a defensive shuffle, a lateral shuffle. That's one of the patterns. And he wasn't really pushing really hard. So I didn't say a lot. I just put the band around his waist and I put a little resistance, and immediately he pushed harder because he had to. His nervous system, his body felt, oh man, if I'm going to move, I got to put a little bit of power into this. And he did. He moved much quicker. And then when we took it off, that still was his pattern. He was able to push harder now because he had that external load kind of fix where he needed to put his effort into. So that's an example of a band. Now, I also, because I was breaking down his shuffle, I used a low box. And the low box is about 2.5 inches high. Sometimes you could use like a weight plate, like a 45-pound bumper plate, something like that, anything like that. And what I did is I put if the box is right here, I put his front foot on the box and the back foot was off it. So you can see the front foot's a little higher. So what that does is that weighted the back leg. It put the weight on the back leg, and then he shuffled across the box. So it went like this, and he came across it, and then the other foot was on top. So what that does, Anthony, two things. Number one, he learned how to use the back leg to produce the force and let the front leg cycle to help him pull himself over the box. And then it switched on the other side, and he did the same thing. So the band that I use was strictly for force production. The low box was to get him to understand, yes, use the back leg, continue that force, but now cycle through with that front leg, because the front leg's more unweighted because it's up on the box. So if that makes sense, yeah. And then we have many, many other tricks. Like if I'm going to use a ladder, like you mentioned, a ladder, we have them move through the ladder doing any kind of footwork pattern. Could be a straddle jumps, could be the icky shuffle, could be any of those, but I put a band around them, and we are now using the elastic part of change of direction. So every time that foot touches, it touches really quick because the band is pulling the athlete, and if the athlete doesn't reposition that foot quick, they kind of stumble and they'll lose their balance. So it changes how they move really, really well. So yeah, those are three things that are really fantastic to be able to kind of have a strategy or a couple strategies to change movement or to teach movement.
Yeah. And are you using that band as assistance when you say it's kind of pulling them and then they have to, so as opposed to resistance, assistance?
Resistance first. So I make them work against it. So if they're going to their left, if they're moving to their left, I pull to the right. So the weight is on the right leg. After time, then I'll assist them. Or if I notice they're sluggish getting through their gait cycle, so they don't move laterally really, really quick, then I'll assist them. And that helps their feet move through space faster because the assistance tells the nervous system, uh-oh, it's going fast. You better move your legs or you're going to fall. So that's the advantage of assistance.
Yeah, I love it. This is a thought process I always had. I taught the martial arts for a long time too. I know I mentioned my phys ed background, but my father had a school in Brooklyn, and I started as young as 16 helping teach the classes. And my mindset always went immediately to how can I force the athlete to do what I want them to do with some type of constraint or piece of equipment, or if I need them to step in a straight line, can I put two sticks here that are going to show like, you have no option but to go straight in this straight line. And it sounds like that's what's going on. These constraints or these stimuluses in the environment to try and get the athlete to do exactly what you want them to do.
Exactly. Well, because of your background and the background that I started in physical education, sometimes we use physical cueing or constraints. Other times it's verbal, right? If I want an athlete to jump high, I could say, hey, push your feet through the floor or put your head through the ceiling. Okay, that's a verbal way to change how they're thinking in that skill. Or I could take a band to put a band around it. And then now I've kind of accomplished the same thing, but one might resonate better with those athletes than the other. And sometimes that's the art of coaching and teaching. You just got to figure it out. You got to figure out what's working best.
Yeah. And I noticed you mentioned in one of your posts too about reactive training. So, which sounds like it's the same thing. It made me think it, provides that stimulus for the person to have to move fast. Like, is that, I know you mentioned the value of reactive training. Is that why you put it in your training?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's one of the first things I do because it tells me how does the athlete move in their environment innately, just naturally. How do they move? So I could do something as simple as standing 10 feet away from them, holding a tennis ball at shoulder height and dropping it. And when they see it drop, they've got to come out of their stance and run and get it before it bounces the second time. That is a form of reactive, or we could call it predictive because they're trying to predict when I'm going to drop it. And then they get accelerated. So I get to see how they're accomplishing those patterns of acceleration. Do they use their arms appropriately? Do they drive their legs down and back? Or do they have a good posture position? But the cool thing, Anthony, is I'm doing it in their environment. Like, I'm not telling them how to run. I'm just telling them, hey, go compete, go catch this ball really quick. Or I could put a partner in front of them and say, when I say go, go, and you got to try to catch them. That's another form of reactive training. So there's a million different ways we can do reactive training. And then the other phrase, or excuse me, the other meaning of the phrase reactive training, which kind of they work hand in hand, is reactive training off the ground is plyometric. So when my foot hits the ground really fast, we can call that reactive as well. It's elastic or reactive. But because I'm making the athlete read something and then make a quick decision and take off, that's also reactive.
So yeah, you're mentioning the piece about reading and predictive. So more than just the physical fitness side of it, it sounds like there's that intuitive part. Do you train that, or is there a way to train that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this was the great thing about being a phys ed teacher, is I had, like 400 guinea pigs a day. We did all, my kindergartners through 12th grade did all these 7 patterns and speed things. Every day we tried to throw something in there. So I would experiment a lot with these kids, and they loved it. And I told them, this is what we're going to do. I don't know how you guys are going to do it, but let's see how you guys can do with this. So if I watched my kindergartners, my first, my second, my primary grade athletes move, it wasn't really efficient all the time. Sometimes it was, not great. But by the time they got into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, because we did a lot of the same things over and over, they became better at predicting, which another word for that could be experience. Okay, the more baseball players see a curveball, the more they can predict that it's probably a curveball by the arm slot of the pitcher. Or tennis, they might read a topspin because they see the player coming over the top, so they predict the bounce that's about to occur. As where a beginner has no idea. They don't know because they haven't had enough experience yet. So one of the things that I did with my kids, and I did this in elementary school, and kindergarten, all the way up through, is I would take a ball and I would have the kids do it with each other, and they had to bounce it with a spin. But if I took the ball and I went like this, when I dropped it, the kids started to learn the ball was going that way because my right hand went over the top. And that meant the ball was going to spin sideways that way. When I first did it, they had no idea. A kindergartner would look at the ball and they'd run at it where it bounced, but it took off that way. They didn't know. 3, 4, 5 times later, if I did the same thing, they figured it out. And then I'd go this way. Then I would top spin it. If they saw my thumbs travel and finish high, they knew the ball was coming at them, so they were ready for it. If my thumbs finished low, they knew the ball was going to go away from them, so they had to chase it. That's reactive training. That's the beginning of becoming a higher level athlete. But at that young age, I used to love teaching them these little nuances to reading and reacting and making a decision. And the better they got at it, it was easier to teach them other games when they got older, like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, because they already had those skill sets.
So you'll explicitly, will you have them always figure it out, or will you take moments to explicitly say, like, this means this? So like, if you see the athlete step right, it means they're going left. If you see, will you explicitly, say that, or is it always more so them figuring it out?
I do more of allowing them to figure it out. If they're straying too far from it, like they're just not figuring it out, then I'll come in and I give them what I call guided discovery, right? I guide them, don't tell them, I just guide them and kind of say, hey, why don't you think about this? Look what he's doing every time, or every time she does this. Don't you kind of see the same thing? And then that makes them think a little bit. I think that's the truest form of learning. I really do. I think rote memory has really hurt us in America because most of teaching, classroom teaching anyway, is rote memory. Well, we study for the test, take the test, get through it, and forget. But if you figure it out, That's why I think physical education is the most important class in school, simply because of what it does physically and mentally and the crossover that we get. And then it helps every other course that you take. So yeah, I'm real big on just guiding them if I need it, but otherwise, repetition and experience helps them learn the process of what's actually happening. That's how we learn as little toddlers, right? We feel things, we lose our balance, we fall, we get up, and that's how we ride a bike, right? You can't be told how to ride a bike, you just got to experience it.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds to me like you're a great teacher.
I tell you, I learned from some really good teachers and great teachers ahead of me, especially my family. They were so good at it, and that was our dinner table. It was like talking about strategies. So,
So you mentioned the movement patterns. I recently started a little project myself. I guess when you're similar mindset of just loving the movement side of things and taking on my own little side projects, but I created my own fundamental movement patterns, and it seems like everyone tends to get their own slightly different version, maybe whether it's the 7 or the 8 or one less or one more. But I'm curious, what are your 7 movement patterns? And then I'm going to specifically focus on 1 or 2, but I'm curious what you want on.
Yeah. So the basic movement patterns that I like all athletes to be able to have, and this doesn't have anything right now to do with deceleration or change of direction. We're just talking about the movement pattern itself, like walking, right? So there's 2 linear ones. Acceleration, which is a little different pattern than max velocity sprinting. Okay, that's an upright. So we got one that's more horizontal, one's a little bit more vertical. Even though they're very similar in what they do, they're a little different. The second 2 are lateral. So we got the lateral shuffle pattern, and then we got the lateral run pattern, which some people call a crossover. We call it a lateral run because of what the hips do. And then the third 2 are retreating, so going backwards. The first one is a backpedal, and there's many forms of backpedals. And then the second one is a hip turn, which means I'm facing this way, but then I open my hips to be able to go backwards. Maybe I go back shuffling, I go back running, or whatever. And then the last one is a jump. So now we've got those 7, and then we have all the variations, because just look at jumping. I mean, you got jumping and hopping and leaping and going from 2 feet laterally and landing on 1. You got just hundreds and hundreds of combinations of that. And really, with the other skills, we got a lot of variety as well. But if my athletes can perform those 7 fundamentals really well, we can build off that. We can build off it and make it very specific. So physical education is going to be very generalized. But now school's over, time to go to football practice. Now, what does a backpedal look like for a cornerback? What does a lateral movement look like for a linebacker? And what does a running back look like when they accelerate? So now we can specialize it into their sport, but they got to have the foundation first.
Yeah, you actually hit right into the question of what I was getting at. So in mine, I know many people categorize it different ways, but locomotion is a category. And then under locomotion, I separated it by linear, which sounds like, you put it into more of an acceleration and a max velocity and a back pedal type of, that I would think those are all in the linear category. I put flight, which would be, jump and hop and all those things as well. And then I did put change of direction, and it sounds like you're using lateral was the term you used there, lateral movements instead. But so lateral movements, what were the 2 that you said? You said it was a crossover step, and which one?
Yep. So a lateral shuffle, like a basketball player moving sideways, right?
Yeah.
And then a lateral run. They're still moving sideways, but they're actually using more of a traditional gait cycle of running versus a lateral gait cycle.
And when it comes to the technical, when you're teaching the technique of a crossover run, so is that the term you use, crossover run?
Lateral run. Yep. Lateral run. Yep.
When you use the term lateral run, or technically, are there any cues or specific things that you're looking for in that lateral run?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the phrases we like to use is pop,
Mm,
push, open, push. So if I'm moving to my left, I'm going to push with my right. My left foot's going to open. Just think base stealing, right? I'm going to push. I'm going to
mm.
open, and then my right leg is my. Oh, excuse me. My left leg after it opens is going to push. So we push, open, and then we push again, and then the right leg comes across. But because I'm still guarding or marking someone, I'm going to not turn completely. I'm just turning and I'm still staying focused on the person in front of me. So that's why we call it a lateral run versus a crossover, because a crossover denotes that we're actually crossing over that front foot. But what we want is we want to turn our lower body and allow the upper body to stay somewhat squared. So that would be the difference.
That's awesome. And can you do the same for, so there were the two versions of the back pedal as well, you said, right? It
Yeah.
was a traditional back pedal and then what, a back pedal run? What was the term you used exactly?
So we got a back pedal and then we've got a hip turn.
The hip
And
turn.
the hip
Oh,
turn
the hip
is,
turn?
yeah. So think of a tennis player at the net and
Mm,
a lob gets hit over their head. They got to hip turn, open their hips, and then sprint back to go chase down the lob. Or a baseball player having a pop fly hit over their head. They open their hips really quick and then they run. And the cool thing, Anthony, is if we look at the back pedal, we teach what we call two different kinds of back pedals. We have a compact back pedal, like a cornerback in football, where they get kind of short and they backpedal with short, choppy steps. Or we have the taller, what we call extended back pedal, which is more like running backwards, like sprinting backwards. And we'll see that often in basketball. When basketball players, they run the half court, they turn, and then they backpedal to see which way the offense is coming.
mm. Yeah, that's awesome. That summed that up really well for me.
Great.
And my fundamental motor pattern, project that I'm working on.
That's good. You got some good stuff going on. Really do. I'm anxious to see how you do with that. That's really good.
Yeah, I can infatuate over these things. I think about movement all day, and
Good.
anytime I'm on a podcast or hear, work with someone that just gets my brain and blood flowing there a little bit, I'm thinking about how I could potentially refine it just a little bit more. For example, I'm already thinking, instead of, because I just have back pedal, I should obviously have the hip turn in there too. And instead of putting crossover step, putting lateral run seems to make more sense to me also. So just this little conversation here stimulating that thought.
Well, it's funny. And again, this is why physical education was so important as I was developing these patterns over the, 30 plus years, is if I said crossover, the kids ran awkwardly and they tried to cross over versus just turn and run, but keep your upper body oriented wherever the play is. So it could be a ball coming at them, but moving laterally. It could be an athlete that they're trying to guard. And so it freed them up. So that's why the phrasing was really important. And then biomechanically, it's really a run. It's a lateral run versus a pure crossover.
Yeah, and it sounds like the same with your hip shift as well. It's anytime I can get into a running position, I'm going to move faster.
There you
So
go.
just my upper body being oriented toward the target because I need to keep my eyes on it, but I'm still trying to shift into a run.
That's right. Yep, exactly.
That's awesome. So I noticed you mentioned that you do those 7 movement patterns in your warm up. And I often think about, for people, how can we make the best use of our time and space with a warm up? And are there other things you do there? Or do you use a warm up to reinforce movement patterns? Is that a good opportunity to do that?
Absolutely. Because, one thing we all complain about when we're trying to improve things with kids is it just seems like we don't have enough time during a session. So I really condense into that session. So my warm-ups are usually involved with some kind of movement patterns. And we try to do all 7. And so for the listeners, I don't have kids during the warm up do max velocity full out sprint for like 40 yards because they're not warm yet.
Right.
But we can do ace skips, snap skips, which is a max velocity sprint technique. So that's how we can kind of mix it up. So let's say later in the session, maybe 15 minutes after that, we might want to do max velocity, but during the warm up, I might do ace skips or some kind of skip that simulates max velocity ground strike. We'll do these things. A really big part of our warm-ups is called the 180 series. So the 180 series is we teach kids to run forward, do a 180 turn, don't stop, keep moving, 180. Now you backpedal the rest of the way. So we're teaching them body and spatial awareness. We're teaching their vestibular system to be able to adapt to this new change of direction of their body and being able to use their eyes to relocate a new stable point of vision. So we add those in there, and we do those not only running in a 180, but also do them shuffling in a 180. So we'll do like 2 shuffles, and then we flip around and we do 2 shuffles going the same way, but facing the different direction. So we add a lot of things in there. And then, of course, we can do all the different types, any kind of jump or hop or leap very easily during a warm-up. And you could use like the ladder or lines and anything you want. It depends on where you want to focus on your population, whatever skill of that, those 7 movement patterns, whatever one you want to focus on. That's how I do it. And it makes it very easy.
And it sounds like you're focusing, and you kind of said it, but more on the technique rather than the max intensity. So it's more of an opportunity to review the technique.
Yeah. And here's what's good. So let's say, like here, kids will have physical education every day. They go every day, like the middle school kids especially go every day. So if we did that warm up, even if it only took 90 seconds to 2 minutes, but we did it every day, that's 5 exposures in 1 week that they had to those skills. In a month, gosh, all of a sudden you're getting 20 exposures just doing that, not including the other times that you dive into it deeper. So within a year, these kids become really good at doing these patterns because it's a part of their warm up, or even if you do it in the body of the workout. But yeah, so that's the cool thing with it, is you don't have to jam it down their throat. Just do it each day, just throw it in a little bit, and over time they get better and better at it.
Yeah, so many gems right here. There was one that stood out to me. I saw that you had written somewhere that you do more small-sided games, like 3-on-3s versus 5-on-5s. And that's a big thing with, in particular, physical education. I'm always trying to preach small-sided games as opposed to, the larger, but I'm curious, what's the reason that you decide to, have the small-sided games versus a 5-on-5?
Yeah, the very highest priority is touches, ball touches, repetitions, whatever you want to call it. If we're doing, let's say we're doing, something that doesn't involve a ball or a bat or whatever, and they're just doing maybe gymnastics or whatever it is. I want to have more reps. They need more reps. So small-sided games allow that to happen. If you do, let's say you've played a full game of soccer and you had, 10, 11, 12, 13 kids, because you're physically all out there playing at the same time, not a lot of kids are going to touch the ball very much. But if you took like, say 12 cones and spread them out all over the field, and you said, okay, Anthony and Lee, you guys are on that cone over there. You're playing one-on-one soccer. And you got to kick the ball until it hits the cone. The other guy's got to mark you and try to stop it. Man, we're getting tons of reps on dribbling and faking and trying to score. And then we might say, okay, now we're going to go 2-on-2. So Anthony and Lee, you guys join, Samantha and Mary, and you guys are going to play 2-on-2 now. Now you have to pass one time at least before you can score. So the small-sided game, number one, gives me lots of touches. The kids can get involved very, very quickly. Number two, I can take a small-sided game, add a constraint to it, and work on the skills that are most important to me to help the kids get better at it. So, maybe they're not very good at passing to the open, person, or passing to the person. This could be volleyball passing. It could be soccer. It could be basketball. It could be football, whatever. And so now we're having an opportunity to be able to improve passing because I put in a constraint that allowed someone to be open, and now the pass is available, right? And that allows me to work on that. But the next maybe 2 months, we come back to this game and I say, okay, now that passer who is normally open isn't going to be open now. Now they got to work to get open. So now my focus might not be on passing to the open person. It might be passing to the person who can get open, who can now maybe make a cut or whatever. So that's the cool thing with small-sided games, Anthony, is we get to control it based on what we feel our kids need, whatever it is. And we have, tons of constraints and varieties to it. So yeah, I think that's the way to keep fun, competitive, appropriate levels of learning in a activity or a game or a sport. You can really go at it without saying, okay, guys, first day of basketball, let's go 5-on-5. Right off the bat, you got kids traveling and throwing the balls all over the place. They don't know what they're doing. But if you did it, if you did king of the court, and 1-on-1, 2-on-2, and you used all the baskets, man, now you got kids playing like crazy.
Yeah, I love it. So a lot of the stuff we spoke about, we're thinking, or I'm thinking in a phys ed lens and kids, but I also have some listeners that are thinking about their own training as like general population. Do you think as an adult, could someone incorporate some of these speed drills and, agility training and all that? Can someone incorporate all these things that we've talked about today into their routine?
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story. This is kind of cool how this happened. So 1994 was the first facility I opened up. And it was about 4,000 square feet, trained primarily athletes. That was what I went after. Well, about 6 months goes in, and the moms would come and dads, and they'd drop their kids off, and they'd come in and sit, sometimes just watch. They'd talk and watch, whatever. So one of the moms comes up to me, she goes, Lee, why don't you do stuff like that with us? Like, if we got a group, why wouldn't you do that? And I said, well, sure. Yeah, I said, absolutely. They're like, we don't want to sit on a machine and do this. We want to throw medicine balls, and we want to, learn how to move laterally, and we want to learn how to use the different stuff you do. I said, you got it. So I started a morning boot camp. We called it a speed boot camp back then. That's what everybody used, boot camps. So I had these retired teachers because of my teaching background. That was my connection. I had just moms that were weekend warrior tennis players and dads. And then I had a ski group, a group of ski patrol and ski instructors. And so we started this group, and I'm telling you, I think I trained them harder than the kids because they loved it. They wanted it. And I would jump in the group with them. At that time, I was still only, I was probably later 20s, so I was still very competitive, and we would train. And I'm telling you, Anthony, that went on for about 12 years. It was originally, it was going to be a 7-week boot camp, and it kept going and kept going. And they said, Lee, why? We'll pay you every month. Don't even ask us when we want to stop. We'll tell you. It just kept going. I literally moved away for a year. We went and we were going to move and try something different. And we ended up coming back. It picked right back up again. They knew I was back. They're like, hey, let's get going again. And so, and I'm not kidding when I say we did all those things. They did the low box stuff. They did the medicine ball series. They did all the 7 patterns and jumping, but it was all to their level. Like, I had one woman who was about 68 years old. And so everything she did was to her level. But she was like, hey, don't hold back on me. I'm okay. I'm good. And she got better and more physical, and their energy and their nutrition changed because they felt good. And then because they felt good, they wanted to try better solutions for their nutrition that kept them feeling good all the time. So it was amazing. I'm telling you, I wish I actually had put more of an emphasis on the older population than I did the athletes, only because the athletes get really busy. Like they start their seasons, they're tough to get, especially today with all the travel sports, as where the adults are like, they're the ones, yeah, train me. After work, before work, whatever, train me. I want to train. So yeah, I love it. It's absolutely, and I think we do a disservice when we make the training too easy because we're afraid because they're older. I think you got to be smart, you got to be safe, but I think they have to still have power. They have to have movement ability. They have to be able to catch themselves when they lose their balance. So you got to train them that way.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I always try to advocate for, we hear the word fitness a lot of times and we think of just being in a weight room. And I used to say, strength and conditioning, oftentimes you're using that as a tool to improve jumping and running. But if you're not jumping and running, what you're trying to improve,
Yeah.
like let's jump and run first. And then, you do that for a little while, then we can maybe do some of these other things or go to the weight room or whatever else it is. And I feel like most of the population can benefit from, if you're thinking leg day, think run and jump.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, you always have to be concerned about the injury, but I think it's possible, you're saying to lower the intensity or meet them where they're at, or, they're not sprinting all out like the athletes per se, but there's still some degree of running and jumping in that routine.
And that's why I use this. I'll put this around my adults. It does two things. It forces them to produce more power, but it allows me to slow them down. So they're working like a son of a gun trying to run against this resistance and accelerate. Acceleration is very safe because it's just pushing. The leg cycle is when that's where they pull muscles, when they're max velocity sprinting. Until they're used to it, I put a band around them and I let them accelerate for 10 yards. And then at the end, I've got the band on them so they slow down really easily. It'd be like running through water. You can't go very fast, but you're working hard. So that's why I would use bands with my adults. It allowed me to protect them, but it allowed them to work really hard and push, so they got better at it.
So would you say based on what you're saying here, is you focus a little more on acceleration than max velocity with those populations?
Early on, but then when they're ready to sprint, if they want to get up and sprint, I will give them a program that they can do on their own. Or if they want to do it with me, because my facilities didn't allow for like full max velocity, it just wasn't big enough. But if they wanted to, I just wrote their program for them and said, here, if you want to get at least 1 day in of sprinting per week or 2 days, I recommend, here it is. Here's what you can go and follow. That way it made it easy for them. But, acceleration was very easy for me to control.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think power is also the most neglected probably component. And I think it's probably the thing we should focus on more. When we think of strength and aerobic training, when you're thinking, power, there's that combination of strength. And really, I think the end goal is power. So it's like, I want strength for power, unless I'm a strength athlete. But, for most people walking around in the day to day, it sounds to me like power would be a better goal to go after than just strength alone, in my opinion. But so last question I'm going to hit you with here. We went over a lot. You're really good at getting right to the point and hitting these questions well. I didn't think we'd get through them all, but we did. I do have some coaches that coach basketball, and we started a league here in Brooklyn.
Good.
So I support a school district here, and we started a basketball league. Are there any specific considerations when it comes to basketball? I don't know if it would make it any different, but meaning, when it comes to your lateral run or your some of those foundational skills or your speed training, or does all of this look the same no matter what sport it is? Are there any considerations for basketball in particular?
Yeah, I love this question. It's because it hits home, because I'm coaching basketball myself now.
Yeah.
So initially, it all should look the same for across the board for volleyball and lacrosse and football, whatever. In the initial stages, let's get the general movement patterns down. Now we're getting preseason and we got to dive in, right? The really fun part with basketball is there's such a reliance on the ability to change pace, whether I'm an offensive player or a defensive player. So if I'm working on, let's say, the lateral shuffle, well, I don't just shuffle like 5 yards automatically. I shuffle maybe a half a step because that's where my opponent went. They may have made one hard jab step with the ball, and then they changed directions. Okay, so now I have to be able to do a really explosive, quick, what I call a snap shuffle. Snap, it's very short, it's very quick. We do a snap shuffle, and then maybe I have to do a hip turn, open up, and then do a lateral run step to be able to catch up to my opponent who just did a hard crossover and tried to explode by me. So within a second, I did a snap shuffle, a hip turn, and a lateral run to be able to stay in front of my opponent. That's the beauty of basketball, the dynamics. That's when the specific nature comes differently just from general movement patterns. Now I have to be able to change the levels, change my height. I got to be able to move my arms differently to block a pass or to get in and maybe steal a dribble move. And Anthony, let's say I'm guarding you. You got the ball on the top of the key and you're dribbling around, making a play. I'm working hard, moving my feet, stay in front of you. Well, my teammates behind me are further away, so they might have to use like a power lateral run, like cover a lot of distance because you just threw like a skip pass all the way to the corner. They were in help position. Now they got to go close out. So they're using a hip turn, a lateral run, but a power lateral run, which means it's going to go further than a snap lateral run, which is really short and quick. Power means more distance. So all of a sudden, we got 10 athletes, because the offense, defense, all doing something a little bit different to be able to beat their opponent or stop their opponent. And if you just sit back and watch it and see the changes of pace, the stuff we've already talked about, the reactivity, I read, I decide, I plan, and then I make my decision on how I'm going to move. And it all happens in a millisecond. And then we've got the laws of reaccelerating coming all the time, which is change of direction. I may have accelerated to my left, but now I got to change directions. I don't have time to stop dead, reorganize, and then start again. It's literally got to be plant and go to get out of that. So that's the specific nature of those 7 patterns. Is basketball brings out the best of movements more than most sports because it's so quick and it's nonstop. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I love it. It makes me think again, a little my martial art background. I've done some point sparring and karate. I've done a lot of different competitions, but there's a tremendous amount of, I think, overlap between the type of quick dynamic lateral steps and it's a lot of similarities, a lot of overlap.
There is, and I spend a lot of time. What allowed me to learn these concepts and methodologies of movement is I studied every sport I can think of. And one of the sports I spend a lot of time watching is martial arts and boxing. Because I want to see footwork. I want to see how they quickly go from avoiding collision with a fist to immediately countering. And if they're going to counter, they're going to throw a punch. What's the back foot doing, and what angle is it to allow them to have that forward movement? Because if that foot gets stuck underneath them, they're kind of backing up as they're throwing the punch versus being able to plant that foot. Like I was a huge Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and Ernie Shavers and all those guys. I grew up, my dad and I used to watch boxing all the time. So I'd watch all those, and I used to, recently too, I'd go on YouTube and look at some old fights. You can go on ESPN and get the old time fights with Rocky Marciano and these guys, and I watch them. I watch what they do, and it helps me understand movement. Whether it's, doesn't matter, the more I understand movement, the better I can help any athlete in any sport. So yeah, it's really cool stuff when you think about it. And that's our physical education background, because
Yep.
our job is to be physically educated and then be able to educate with physical literacy to our students.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Wow. This was lightning fire gems. I can't wait to rewatch it myself and take some notes. But before we close out, are there, I think we hit a lot, but is there anything that you maybe want to share? Not that you have to, but just open
Yeah.
the floor.
No, I appreciate it. Absolutely. And I'm so honored to be able to, speak to your listeners and to yourself. And one of the things that I would always encourage is when we become teachers, coaches, whatever, we think we have a license to talk all the time. And sometimes we become better teachers when we listen and we open our eyes and we watch. And I think if everyone watching, so whether they're a teacher or a coach, develop models. So develop a model of movement, develop a model of how an athlete performs a skill. If you understand the models, like you could talk about a model of a various type of a kick, a roundhouse kick or whatever it is. There's a model, and if you saw a beginner do it, you would say, okay, this kid needs some work because he doesn't fit the model. Well, that's how I look at movement. So I encourage the listeners, if they're intrigued to want to do more with it, just develop models. What should acceleration look like? What should their arms do? What should their legs do? And where should their body be in space? And once we start understanding that, we become really quick at identifying flaws. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice. Understand it by watching it, listening, and seeing it, and then have those models to be able to bounce off your head really quick.
I love it. And I'll make sure I know you have a certification, right? A speed certification, and ways for people to stay connected with you.
Yeah.
So maybe if some of my listeners want to check that out, I'll make sure I put it in the
Thank you.
thing. All right,
Thank
as
you.
well.
Yeah. And I always get back to people as quick as I can.
Yeah, you got back to me very fast. So this was great. Like I said, so many gems, lightning speed. I'm going to rewatch it myself, take my own notes on this. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to slightly reorganize, a little bit of my fundamental movement patterns there. The lateral run, like I said. So, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise, and it was great having you on today.
Oh, my pleasure. All mine, Anthony. Thank you. You do a great job with this too, and best of luck.
Thank you. All right, Lee. I'll see you.
All right. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.